Knowledge for Men, episode 52.
Welcome to KnowledgeForMen.com, where boys turn into men, where men turn into leaders, into lions, the ferocious few who stand strong, a place where you grow to become the man you were born to be. It's time to take massive action towards the life you want. Get the health, get the relationships, business, and career you've always dreamed of. Achieve a level of success and happiness that you've been searching for so many years. Life has given you enough, and it's time to take a stand and take full control of your life. Stand with us as we interview the most inspiring and successful leaders to give you real-world advice to crush life and awaken the sleeping giant inside of you.
This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Basically, it's everything you need to create an exceptional website. It's an all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website, blog, e-commerce store, or even online portfolio. For a free 14-day trial and 10% off your first purchase, go to squarespace.com and use offer code KNOWLEDGE. It's a really great platform for anyone getting started or looking to switch over to something easy to use with a great design. Again, that's offer code KNOWLEDGE for a free 14-day trial and 10% off. All right, guys, I'm here with Steven Kotler. He's a New York Times bestselling author, award-winning journalist, and the co-founder and director of research for the Flow Genome Project. His books include The Rise of Superman, which will be the focus of today's interview, and Abundance with Peter Diamandis, A Small Fury Prayer, West of Jesus, The Angle Quickest for Flight, and his work has been translated into 30 languages, and his articles have appeared in more than 70 publications, including the New York Times, Forbes, The Atlantic, and Wired. All right, and Steven, I'm happy to have you on the show.
Nice to be here.
And Steven, I always kickstart the show off with a favorite success quote and something they've lived by and why. What do you got for us, Steven?
So this one comes from William James, who was kind of the godfather of American psychology. He's a Harvard philosopher, psychologist, and physiologist. It's most people live in a very restricted circle of their potential being. They make use of a small portion of their possible consciousness and of their soul's resources in general, much like a man who out of his whole organism should get into the habit of using and moving only his little finger.
So what does this quote really mean to you, and what can the listeners take away from that?
Well, what James is saying is that James was interested in altered states of consciousness and how they impacted performance, specifically flow. Peak experience is what was the term he was using back then. So what that quote basically pokes at is the very beginning of research into ultimate human performance, the very beginning idea that, hey, there is biology underneath this stuff, and we can crack that open and sort of hack ultimate human performance. All the research that I'm involved in today is the end result of the quest that he set in motion with that quote.
And you just came out with this book, The Rise of Superman, which decodes the mystery of ultimate human performance. And for all the listeners, he draws on decades of research from extreme athletes like big wave legend Laird Hamilton, big mountain snowboarder Jeremy Jones, and skateboarding pioneer Danny Way, who's most known for jumping the Great Wall of China on a skateboard. Okay, so Kotler's going to help us explore this whole frontier of the science of flow and optimal state of consciousness, and when we feel and perform at our absolute best, and how to achieve this regularly in our lives. So, Steven, I'm really interested in this topic. This is going to be a great episode, but I want to know more about your story and how you got started with all this.
So, when I was 30 years old, I got really sick. I got Lyme disease, and I spent 3 years in bed and, kind of lost everything. I'm bankrupt, lost the house, lost the girl, lost all of it. And the doctors pulled me off drugs. There was nothing anybody else could do for me. And I was functional, like clear-headed and pain-free sort of 10% of the time. I had no life. I mean, it was just gone, and nobody knew if I was ever going to get any better. And I was going to kill myself because I was just a burden to my friends, my family. I couldn't work. I couldn't do anything. And a friend of mine shows up at my door and said, we go surfing, and it's laughable. I can't walk across the room. And she won't leave and won't leave and won't leave. And after a couple of hours of her badgering, I was like, what the hell, let's go surfing. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? And they kind of hobbled me to the car and drove me to the beach and went to the wimpiest beginner wave in the world. It had been like 5 years since I had surfed. And the sun was out and the tide was low and the waves were tiny, and I kind of waddled out there. They had to help me out there. They gave me a board the size of a Cadillac. It was gigantic. And a couple seconds later, a wave came, and I spun the board around, and I paddled twice, and I popped up to my feet, and I popped up into this absolutely different dimension. As time had slowed to an absolute crawl. My body, first of all, I felt great. I felt amazing. I was clear-headed. I could think. My senses were incredibly heightened. Felt like I had panoramic vision. And I was performing at a really great level. I could really surf. It was amazing. And it was a quasi-mystical experience, and I had 5 more waves that day, and they all felt like that. And I went home afterwards. I was totally disassembled. People put me into bed, and they brought me food. For 14 days, I couldn't walk again. And then on the 15th day, when I could walk again, I went back to the ocean, and I did it again. And over the course of about 6 months, when the only thing I was doing differently in my life was going surfing, having these really crazy experiences out in the waves, I went from 10% functionality to 80% functionality. So my initial quest was, what the hell just happened? I mean, surfing is not known as a cure for chronic autoimmune conditions. And worse, Lyme is only fatal if it gets into your brain. I was a science writer by training. I didn't have quasi-mystical experiences, and I was pretty sure that this was, I might be feeling better, but this was proof that the disease had gotten into my brain and I was going to die and go crazy first. So it began this giant quest to figure out what the hell had gone on with me. And what I soon learned is that the states I was achieving, flow states, that there was 150 years of scientific research behind them. We knew quite a bit, including, for example, that these states jack up the immune system. The neurochemicals that are produced in flow all amplify the immune system, and they reset the nervous system, so they calm you back down. Autoimmune condition is essentially a nervous system gone haywire. So one of the reasons I got better so fast is the combination of resetting my nervous system, which probably had not calmed down in over 3 years, and just flushing some of the cortisol and norepinephrine out of my system, combined with everything else. But the other thing is these states, we know from a lot of research that these states underpin happiness. The happiest people on earth are the people who have the most flow. So suddenly I had something to live for, and sort of rebuilt my life, and it led me on a giant quest. And what I discovered along the way is the same state that had helped me get from very subpar back to normal was helping the world's best action adventure sport athletes go from average to downright superhuman, and they were harnessing flow to really achieve the impossible.
Okay, so if you're going to say that experiencing more flow in your life is going to make you happier, then can we say that the more flow you experience in your day-to-day life, then the more successful you're going to be in your life?
Well, for sure. For example, McKinsey, the business consulting firm, did a giant 10-year study of top executives, and they found that top executives reported being 5 times more productive in flow than out of flow. So that's one example. We know that Salim Ismail, who's the global ambassador for Singularity University, used to be the head of innovation in Yahoo, and I talk about this all the time. Salim has said, and I agree with him, that he thinks flow startups, for sure, generate tremendous amounts of flow. And we can talk about why later if you want. But Salim believes that the line between a successful startup and a failure, I mean, obviously there are lots of lines, right? Only 1 out of 10 are ever going to succeed. So most fail. But in the ingredients to successful startups, flow may be the dividing line between those that succeed and those that fail. For certain, we know that flow correlates very highly with life satisfaction, overall meaning, and how valuable is my time, that kind of stuff. Doesn't always correlate with happiness, because flow requires that you constantly challenge yourself. There's a lot of struggle involved in trying to lead a life with lots of flow states in it. It correlates with happiness, but it's better with life satisfaction. But researchers now believe there's a flow state at the heart of pretty much every athletic gold medal, major scientific breakthroughs, significant progress in the arts. It's pretty much, you mentioned Danny Way, and in one of the videos we made around Rise, Danny said flow states, that heightened attention, is the secret to stepping up my game. Without those states, there would be no stepping up my game. And I think he's totally right.
And this leads me to ask, what if you're not experiencing flow in your life? Then life is really challenging for you because you're not getting these peak boosts. You're not reaching these optimal, state of consciousness where you're able to perform at your best. So, is there a similarity between your passion and flow? And, when you're in the right field, your body gives you flow because it wants you to succeed.
Yeah, it's a great, fantastic question. I totally understand why you asked it the way you asked it. There are like 6 answers here. And so the short answer is flow science goes back about 150 years. We spent the first 130 of those years trying to map the psychology of the state. We've spent the past 20 mapping the neurobiology, what's going on under the hood. As a result of mapping the neurobiology, we have discovered, first of all, that flow is ubiquitous. It shows up anywhere and anyone, provided certain initial conditions are met. So nobody is locked out of flow. And talk about dead-end jobs. When Csikszentmihalyi, Haley Csikszentmihalyi, who was at the University of Chicago, did his huge flow study back in the 70s, he talked to a lot of experts, ballet dancers, rock climbers, chess players, surgeons, but then he went and talked to everybody. Detroit assembly line workers, Navajo sheep herders, Italian grape farmers, elderly Korean women, Japanese teenage motorcycle, really everyone. They all told him the same thing. They felt their best and performed their best when they were in this state of flow. So we know people in dead-end jobs can achieve it too. What this neurobiology has told us, among other things, is that there are 17 triggers that drive people into flow. So people who have a lot of flow in their lives have literally packed their lives with these triggers. So we can come back to those in half a second, but let me answer your question. All of these triggers, flow follows focus. It is a state of intensely focused attention. We're totally absorbed in the moment, right? Action and awareness start to merge. Your sense of self vanishes. Time passes strangely. Sometimes people experience this feeling of oneness with everything. We can explain why that happens if you want. But most importantly, people are just sucked into the now, right? So all the flow hacks are things that drive attention into the now. So why does passion work so well? And why do people who have jobs that have a lot of passion have more flow? Some of it is they chase flow into their careers. Some people figured out, I was a writer. I knew that writing produced flow more than anything else I could do, so I didn't want to do anything else. So I followed that kind of my addiction to the flow state into a writing career because I didn't have any other choice. So that's one way it impacts it. The other way it impacts it is, we see this all the time in startups. People come together around an idea, they become very passionate about it, and because they're passionate about it, they pay more attention. So it drives focus. We also know that when you dissect passion, you find autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And all three of those are preconditions needed for flow or characteristics of the flow state. So a lot of what the recipe for passion is basically those things that create lots of flow in our lives on a general level, those things we believe in that create lots of flow. And so we pay more attention to those things. We're intrinsically motivated to get more of them. So it works on both ends, right? It's important to be passionate about what you do kind of no matter what, because it's going to drive focus and precipitate flow.
Okay, and I've read most of the book now, and I know there's different stages of flow. Can we go into that now?
Yeah, the single most important thing in 15 years of teaching people about this material that I can tell anybody to increase the amount of flow in their lives is that there was an old idea that flow was this binary. You're either in the zone or you're out of the zone. It worked like a light switch. Turns out that's not the case at all. We now know that flow is a 4-stage cycle, and there's a complicated neurobiological process at work underneath each of these stages. And you can't, to get into flow, you have to go through this full cycle, and then you have to start it all over again. So understanding the flow cycle gives you a map. You can map out your personal experience and say, okay, this is where I am on the map. This is what I should do next. So that's why this is so useful. And the other thing that's most important about this is that when you look at flow as a cycle, what you start to realize is that 2 of the elements in the cycle, maybe 3 depending, don't feel flowy at all. They feel almost the opposite of flow. And so you have to, knowing where you are allows you to kind of map towards a subjective phenomenon. It's difficult. You're navigating towards something that you can't quite see. So this map gives you a way to see it. So on the front end of this flow state is a stage known as struggle. Struggle is a loading phase. We are overloading the brain with information. It is not a lot of fun. So for an athlete, this means learning a new skill. For a writer, this is the research phase where you're reading hundreds of articles and you're struggling with your structure and what comes first and what comes second and talk to 100 people and blah, blah. And you literally want to take it to the point at which your brain feels like it's about to explode. You want to do that for a lot of reasons, but the short version is you just want to actually take yourself almost into totally dark, deep frustration, and then you stop. And the next stage of the cycle is known as the relaxation response. Relaxation, you literally have to take your mind off the problem. So this means go for a long walk. Or why do people have brilliant insights in the shower? Because they're washing their body and it's taking their mind off the problem and they're having this relaxation response. Work out any of those kinds of things that take your mind away from the subject and let you relax. What's going on here is you're giving the brain to switch from kind of slower conscious processing over to subconscious processing. The subconscious system, the pattern recognition works a lot faster. The information processing works a lot faster. It can go a lot farther. It can solve problems more, but you have to load up the conscious mind with everything you can give it and then get out of the way so we can go from explicit processing to implicit processing. Once that happens, we're kicked into the 3rd stage, which is the flow state itself. And that's amazing and it's wonderful and it's great. And the only tip I have here is people who are not used to producing a lot of flow in their lives don't have, one thing that happens as you start getting better at this is you start being able to extend the state, keep your focus in the state, stay away from those distractions, don't let the conscious mind interfere, you can stay out of your own way. And one of the ways this happens is you get sort of more used to the fact that you feel like Superman in flow. It's no longer like, oh my God, what the hell is going on? And look at those pretty trees and everything else like you're crazy high. Instead, you start to realize, hey, this is that state of ultimate performance. I'm here for a reason. I'm supposed to do something with it. And it allows you to extend the state a little bit more. On the other side of the flow state is a very profound neurochemical dump. 5 very potent neurochemicals get dumped into your system during flow. All of these take a little while to replenish. They take certain nutrition to replenish. They have cycles, and you can't immediately go back and flow. So you go from this incredible high of feeling like Superman into this deep low. The backside of a flow state, we call it the dark side of flow, is really a depressing place to be because you don't have any more feel-good neurochemistry for a little while. And the critical thing about this point is a lot of people get really hung up. They felt like they could do anything in a flow state, and now they're really down and they don't know what to do. You're supposed to be relaxing. It's a down cycle. You're supposed to not attach to those negative emotions. You just kind of literally flow through it and just let it go. And this is important for a couple of reasons. First, if you start chasing the flow state, one of the things that happens in flow is learning and memory is massively amplified. It's because of the neurochemicals. Neurochemicals are essentially big tags on experience that say, hey, important, save me for later. And the more neurochemicals you get, the better chance something moves from short-term storage into long-term holding. So flow, this big dump, really amplifies learning and memory. And studies run by DARPA with military snipers, they found snipers in flow learn 230% faster than normal. In a non-military study, they repeated the whole experiment. They found you could take a novice marksman and train them up to the expert level in 50% less time if they were in flow. One of the reasons it's so important not to get freaked out that we're really attached to, we're no longer Superman, is if you start to get anxious, you start to secrete stress hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine, you will block this learning. So you will, while the state will have amplified performance, you won't get the long-term benefit because you're stressed out at not being in flow. Worse, you have to move from this back-end low back into struggle. You have to restart the whole cycle if you actually want to get back into flow. If you're totally depressed at not being in flow, at no longer feeling like Superman, getting up for the serious challenge of struggle is that much more difficult.
And right now I can tell there's probably listeners thinking, how do I get into flow when I want or when I need it most? So how can people easily tap into flow, or what can they do so that they're experiencing more flow in their life?
Yeah, that's exactly. So why have we seen such rampant progression in action adventure sports in the past 25 years? It's because these athletes have figured out how to reliably get into flow and repeatedly get into flow. And what they've done is, as I said, there were 17 flow triggers. They have packed their lives with these triggers. But anybody can do this. Anybody can just kind of import these triggers into their own lives. It is absolutely, as you just pointed out, a voyage of self-discovery. This is not kind of self-help, take 2 pills and climb Everest in the morning. It doesn't work that way. But what we do know is that it is working with these triggers will reliably increase the amount of flow in your life considerably. So what are they? Let's start, as you pointed out, action. There are 3 environmental, 3 psychological, 10 social, and 1 creative. Where the action and adventure sport athletes have excelled the most is in the 3 environmental triggers. And the first of those is flow follows focus. So the first environmental trigger is known as high consequences. Quite simply, flow follows focus and consequences catch our attention. These guys are performing in a really high consequence environment, and you can't screw up. Now, what's cool here is when you look under the surface of that, what you find out is, well, consequences catch our attention. It doesn't just have to be physical consequences. You can replace those physical consequences. You can replace the physical risk with emotional risk, creative risk, intellectual risk, and it's totally individual. So Laird Hamilton, he's got to paddle into Jaws at 50 feet to pull this trigger, but for the shy guy, he's just got to walk across the bar and talk to the pretty girl. It's totally individual. And, underneath it all, you're looking at dopamine response. And honest to God, like, we react to social phobias, social fears, just as much as we react to physical fears. Because when we lived on the veldt in earlier hunter-gatherer days, banishment. If you screw up socially, banishment was death. So like we may think of these social fears as, oh wow, I'm just, raising my hand in a meeting and speaking up, and it's not really that big deal. But the brain thinks your life is on the line, and it responds neurochemically the same way. This is great news for everybody. It means that you don't have to have the really serious high consequence environment to trigger flow. What it does mean for organizations or individuals or entrepreneurs is you have to create an environment that is risk-friendly. Silicon Valley is great at this. Why does the fail-forward model work so well? One of the reasons is because it drives rapid experimentation. Another is it ups the level of risk people can take. That drives focus and creates more flow. So while people may be taking bigger risks, they're also getting better performance, which ends up giving up you better results. So that's the first trigger that athletes pull. The next two environmental triggers, one of them is called a rich environment. Now that's shorthand for lots of novelty, complexity, and unpredictability. Three things that show up in spades in all action adventure sports. But the hack here is pretty simple. Increase the amount of novelty, complexity, and unpredictability in your life. You're trying to get a neurochemical response underneath it. When we encounter novelty, the brain releases dopamine. When encounter overwhelming complexity, the brain releases dopamine. And I think most people, by the way, have experienced this. They pulled this trigger. If you've ever stood in front of like the Grand Canyon and felt awe, or seen an IMAX movie for that matter and felt awe, awe is like that quiet loss of time, absorption in the moment. You get sucked in for a second and reality seems to pause. That's the front end of a flow state. So most people have some experience with pulling this trigger. They just didn't know that it was novelty, complexity, and unpredictability that was really driving it. So just increase the amount of those things in your life, and you will increase access to flow. The last one is known as deep embodiment, and deep embodiment basically means you're paying attention with all your senses at once. Action adventure sport athletes pull this trigger all the time because they experience zero G's, multiple G's, and polyaxial rotation around one's middle. We're gravity-bound creatures, so we don't get to feel those things very often. So when we do, it's a sensation that grabs hold of all of our, attentional systems, and we focus everything on what the hell is my body doing, drives focus. But it's not obviously just action adventure sport athletes who can pull this trigger. You do it. Yoga is built around this deep embodiment trigger. Montessori education is also, they often call it embodied education, which means they emphasize learning through doing. One of the other things we know about Montessori education is that it is one of the highest flow environments out there. And this is based on a lot of research done by Csikszentmihalyi and a guy named Kevin Rothunde at the University of Utah. And Montessori kids outperform regular kids on pretty much any test you give them. And one of the reasons people believe this happens is because it drives so much flow. And one of the reasons it does that is because it's a very embodied sense of learning. Don't just read about the windmills. Go out and build one. Gets more of your sensory streams involved, and it grabs your hold of your attention system and drives it into the now and creates more flow. So examples like this go on and on. None of these sound all that tricky, and none of them are. The power of them is that you can start applying them in aggregate and really kind of filling your life with preconditions that lead to more flow.
So are we talking about creating the right environment so we're experiencing flow in our everyday lives on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it's not just environment. So let's jump to the psychological triggers. You're totally right, it is. But one of the psychological triggers is known as clear goals. And the idea here is quite simply, when we know what we're doing and we know why we're doing it, attention can stay more focused in the present. That's not really an environment, that's an internal trigger. It's a psychological state of mind. It's go into your activities and chunk them down into clearly measurable goals, small steps that are achievable. That drives focus in the now, helps you achieve greater flow, but it's not really an environmental change, it's an internal change.
I see, and this made me really think of something. For example, let's say an athlete experiences flow, and as he experiences flow over time, that bar raises. So it's forcing the athlete to push himself harder and harder in order to reach that flow state again. So then we could say that as a byproduct of reaching this flow state, and as the bar raises, then this, as the byproduct, is going to be he advances. His performance just gets better. His ability gets better.
Yeah, so the idea in flow, that's another of the psychological triggers, is known as the challenge skills ratio. We are fully present. Our attention is most focused in the now when the challenge of the task at hand slightly exceeds our skills. So you want to stretch yourself, but not snap. That's when attention is most focused and we're most likely to go into flow. But that's a moving target. On Monday, you surf 3-foot waves, and on Tuesday, you can suddenly surf 3.5-foot waves, and so on. And so it goes up slowly. Where this gets tricky, by the way, is kind of that sweet spot is for people who aren't super driven, that sweet spot is definitely the point at which you start to feel uncomfortable. So I know I pushed my writing far enough if I'm slightly uncomfortable with the level of truth I'm telling, but I also know that's what I need to connect with my reader. So I strive to make myself uncomfortable, and you have to get used to that. Problem with high performers, people are super crazy driven, they often blow by that sweet spot without even noticing. They will tackle challenges that are 20% greater, 30% greater, 40% greater without realizing that what they're supposed to do is stretch and not snap. And so they will lock themselves out of flow, and they won't achieve this giant task if they would have actually bitten off something slightly smaller, chunked down the bigger goal, and taken it gradually. They would have been precipitating more flow and sort of getting a paradigm shift in outcome along the way.
And I'm kind of worried about the guys who, the people who become addicted to this flow state. Like, what happens to them?
Flow is massively addictive, and people talk about it as the source code of intrinsic motivation and things along those lines. And what it means is once something starts producing flow, we go extraordinarily far out of our way to get more of it. But one of the reasons it's so addictive and so it drives you forward so much and drives this progression that you were talking about a second ago is I call it's like the high bluff. When you're in flow, not only are you performing at your best, but you get a vision of what else might be possible if you could get in this state more often, so you can see this farther goal. So I always say, when people are stuck in dead-end jobs and they really need them, they have to go to work to feed their family, and they're kind of locked in, they've got high rent, and they don't know what to do, and it's not producing a lot of flow, and they can't import these 17 flow triggers. I always say, find an outside-of-work activity that absolutely drives you into flow. And the reason this is so important is it going to solve your immediate work problem? It's not. But one of the things flow does is it heightens pattern recognition in our brain, the ability to link ideas together. It amplifies creativity as a result. So when you're in a flow state, you see what's possible for yourself in that moment, but you also get this vision of what might be possible for you down the line, and it opens up these doorways into the adjacent possible. It gives you a kind of window into your future that you would have never, ever noticed without the flow state. And over time, if you keep going in this direction, passion is going to start to kick in. And I don't want to say it's 100%, but most people will find it. They'll chase it into something else and go, oh, wow, there's another career over here. Or I could move laterally from what I'm doing it and combine it with this new thing in this new way that I never knew was possible. And suddenly I have a fulfilling career. Those doors start to open more with flow. And I can't quantify it. I can't give you studies. I can just tell you that, psychologists from William James to today have made this exact same argument.
Okay, so a good action item then would be, for all of us listening, myself included, is to get into a flow state in the morning, whatever that is. It could be some activity that you like to do, some game, some physical exercise, going biking, cycling, swimming, playing basketball, whatever it is, because if you experience flow state in the morning, then what you're saying is that we're going to have heightened or increased productivity for the rest of the day. So even though there's going to be less time that we're going to have for work, that time that we do spend at work will be maximized, will be multiplied, because we'll be reaching that flow state before we even get to work.
Absolutely. In fact, there's one of my favorite studies on this is Teresa Amiable at Harvard discovered that people not only experience heightened creativity in flow, that heightened creativity lasts the day after, sometimes 2 days after flow. So in today's business world where creativity is the number one quality in a CEO, most desirable in a CEO, according to most studies, we're looking at, a state that get into flow in the morning, do yoga, go work out, go for, whatever it takes to get you into flow, paint watercolors, ride a skateboard, doesn't matter. The amplification of the state is going to reverberate throughout your day and possibly throughout the next couple of days.
Okay, well, to be more specific, how long can this flow state, actually last? Is it hours, days, like you just mentioned, or can it even go on for weeks?
So it's a great and tricky question, and the short version is we don't really know. We know that the neurochemicals that underpin flow should peak after about 20 minutes. So most of the time, flow lasts about an hour and a half, and that's pretty standard. There's an altruism-triggered flow state known as helper's high that has been shown to last for days. No one's exactly certain why yet. And I'll tell you a different story. I wrote my book, Small Furry Prayer. The second half of my book, I had 3 months worth of writer's block, went mountain bike riding, got into a crazy flow state, came home and sat down and wrote 250 pages in 2 weeks straight. I would sleep and I would start writing in the morning, and creativity is another trigger for flow, and it's really the pattern recognition underneath the creativity triggers dopamine, but whatever. The creative process, I would get back into it. It would kick me back into the flow state, and I've never done anything like that. And that book, literally the last half of the book, was written 2 weeks straight in pretty much a nonstop flow state, broken only by eating meals and sleeping and walking my dogs. So yeah, I've seen, in my own personal experience, I've seen flow states last a couple of weeks, or the ability to, and I think, by the way, startups, you see that a lot with startups, the push towards launch. People drop into, there's a group flow, collective version of the state where a bunch of people can get into a flow state together. If you've ever seen a fourth quarter comeback in football, chances are that's group flow. And it happens a lot in startups because a lot of the social triggers that produce group flow are sort of baked into startups. The conditions are just there, and it drives people into flow. So you can see 3 or 4 month launches where the whole team's in this kind of perpetual group flow state. They kick it out of it and they drift back into it. But it'll last a long time for a company going towards launch.
Yes, I could see that, especially even myself with this podcast. I work on this all the time and putting in so many hours. I wake up, it's sun, and then the next time I look out the window, it's pitch black outside. So, and with yourself, when you said you were writing that book, how you were just constantly just writing and writing, waking up and writing and doing nothing else but the writing. And at what point does this become dangerous towards your life? You're just constantly hitting your flow state and you're excelling in your career, but what about the rest of your life? Because I believe in balance and having a well-balanced lifestyle, following health, wealth, relationships, and personal growth.
Well, it's an interesting question. And one thing we know is you have to move through the 4-stage cycle. So you don't live in flow. Nobody's going to live in flow. And constantly stepping up your game is hard and it's difficult, and just the grind of that is going to kick people out of flow for long stretches, right? Even in the best case scenario. But the other half of that is the people who are best at this have built their lives around the things that generate flow. That's what they do. That's all they do. That's all I do. I built my life around flow states, action sport athletes. And that's also why you see, it's why Danny Way plays in a band. Because when he is done skating for the day, which both creates flow, but it's also his job. And when he's done skating for the day, he can go do something that also produces flow that's not as critical. So the people really do build their lives around the state. There is a dark side to flow. This is not self-help, as I said. These chemicals are addictive. And you need to know what you're doing. You need to understand the triggers, and you need to understand the cycle. And still, even when you understand all of it, there's no guarantees, and it's not always fun. So you have to be up for that too.
And I like that you said Danny Way, he skates and he plays in a band. So he has 2 areas where he's experiencing flow. So it's really about setting up your life so you're experiencing flow from multiple different places versus just one place.
I do 3 things in my life. I'm an athlete. I like to mountain bike and ski and surf and all of that stuff. So I do that. I run an animal sanctuary with my wife. We have flow baked into our healing methodology, and the altruism itself drives me into flow. And I make my living as a writer, which creativity drives me into flow. So everything else has kind of been moved out. There's very little that I do that can't precipitate flow.
Okay. And Stephen, before we jump into the knowledge round, I want to touch on really what's one action that you want people to take after they read The Rise of Superman? What do you want them to go do?
There were a lot of different goals in Rise of Superman. What do I want people to take? I want people to realize that one of the points of Rise of Superman is that most experts believe we're at the front end of this revolution, that what we're seeing now with Possible Because of Flow is maybe 1 or 2 or 3% of what's actually possible. This is translatable to anybody. It means that our vision of what we actually believe for ourselves is so much more limited than our possibility. So on that level, there's a go big message at the heart of Rise of Superman, and that's what I hope people take away with it.
All right, great message. And Stephen, let's now jump into the knowledge round. Are you ready?
Bring it on.
Have you ever tried to set up a website and just give up? Did you get overwhelmed? Was there just so much content available that you just put that project aside? Well, Squarespace makes it easy to quickly get a professional site up and running so you can focus on doing the things that you like doing and not coding. Squarespace is constantly improving their platform with new features, new designs, and even better support. They have beautiful designs for you to start with and all the style options you need to create a unique website for your personal taste and brand. It's incredibly easy to use, and if you need support, I know Squarespace has an amazing support team that works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They even have a great support team with over 100 employees. I guess in New York City, the office has been codenamed the Care Bear Lair. And that's not it, guys. You can get started for as little as $8 a month, and this includes a free domain name if you sign up for a year. It's a great deal, and that includes hosting, you guys. Every design automatically includes a unique mobile experience that matches the overall style of your site. So your content will look great on every device every time. That's really big, guys. Mobile is the future. If you sign up for Squarespace, make sure to use offer code KNOWLEDGE to get 10% off something that I worked out for you guys on your first purchase and to show support for Knowledge for Men. Again, that's offer code KNOWLEDGE.
Welcome to the Knowledge Round, where the guests will be asked rapid-fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime.
All right, Steven, what advice would you give to someone who's feeling lost or unsure of their purpose?
Find something that produces flow and do more of it.
All right, so try new things. And Steven, can you go ahead and name a person who's had a tremendous impact on your life, maybe a mentor? What did he or she say to you?
Peter Diamandis, my co-writer at Abundance. And, I've known Peter for a really long time, and I met Peter when he first dreamed up the X Prize, and he wanted to open the space frontier. And I wrote a big article about it, but I was really dubious that it was going to work. And then 15 years later, the X Prize is won, or 10 years later, the X Prize is won, and we open the space frontier. It's now, there's $1 billion worth of investments in the commercial spaceflight area. And I saw one guy do this. So what I learned from Peter is, oh my God, are we capable of the impossible?
Wow. And I'm looking at the website right now. You're doing some incredible things there. And this question here is going to be challenging for you as you are an author, but what are your 3 most influential books and why?
Wow, that's a really tough question. Yeah, that was awful. But the first book I want to throw out there was Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow. I started out as a novelist, and what Pynchon was trying to do was kind of push on language as kind of far as you could while still kind of telling great stories, because he was trying to get language to go after kind of bigger, harder philosophical questions. And so I was hugely influenced by that idea that you could really do these super, super crazy creative things with language. So that, to me, is Pynchon. The other 2, God, I'm looking at my bookshelf and I have no idea what answer to give. David Quammen's The Song of the Dodo. It's a book about the one environmental book I think everybody should read, and it's a book about what a field known as island biogeography, which is kind of it's why extinctions happen. But it's a systems-eye view of ecology, and that it was hugely influential on me because I'm a macroscopic thinker, and the way he kind of went at how do you talk about really hard, complex ideas in a compelling, kind of fun narrative was really influential to me. Because the watchwords in my writing are never boring, never arrogant, and never confusing. And when you want to write about really complex topics, kind of never boring, never arrogant, and never confusing is really hard to do all at once. And Quammen was one of the people, that book showed me what might be possible for science writing, and that was hugely impactful. And I think it's just a masterpiece in kind of environmental thinking. And then Rob Schulthe's Bone Games. Rob Schultes was the first, he was an outside writer from back in the 80s and 90s for Outside Magazine, where I also did some work. And the whole quest that I'm involved in, the whole kind of study of flow science and optimal performance in action sports, that book trailblazed it. That was the very first time I had seen anybody kind of talk about those things out loud and talk about the science underneath it. So I owe a lot of my career to that book.
All right. I know that was a challenging question for you. I'll have to recap and yeah.
Sorry.
Well,
sorry.
It's all good. Now, all right. Imagine you had 60 seconds with your 20-year-old self.
what would you tell them to do, and what would you tell them not to do?
I would tell them that learning and skill acquisition is invisible. That the point is you're going to suck at something and suck at something and suck at something to the moment that you have a giant breakthrough, and you're going to level up and you're not going to see it coming. And so don't ride the frustration as far down as I did, because that level of frustration is actually a sign of progress, that you're getting closer to your goal and you will break through. That's what I tell myself.
And anything that you would tell him not to do?
Well, there was that weekend.
The Vegas.
Well, anything not to do. I mean, don't ski off that cliff. I've broken over 100 bones, so I think there are a couple of those I'd like to take back.
Chasing that flow state, aren't you?
Yeah, I chased too hard. For years, I didn't learn my lesson.
All right, and going a little deep here, what's your philosophy, Stephen, on life and success?
I don't know if I have a philosophy on life or success, but one thing that people have reminded me over the years, and I think it's always very hard to trust your own life as the map of your achievements. Very few people. At one point I realized that all the things I had succeeded at were just literally the things I had stuck with, that I just didn't give up. My first book took 11 years to write, and it became a bestseller. It took me 7 years of knocking on doors to found my first nonprofit. It became a huge success, right? I've learned to trust the truth of my life, and that, if I keep at it, eventually I will succeed. And most people don't notice that in their own lives. So I really think it's worth looking back over your lives at the things you've actually been really good at, and trust that you're really good at that, and build the future on those skills that you're already great at.
I like that. And you're really focusing on leveraging your strengths and building upon your strengths. I like that. And Stephen, now do you have any last parting piece of guidance or maybe a final short story for the thousands of listeners today?
I just want to round out what you said earlier about Danny Way and the Great Wall of China. Danny Way jumped the Great Wall of China on a skateboard, but he did it with a shattered ankle, a broken knee, he could barely walk, and he's afraid of heights. So he had to start the whole thing 150 feet in the air. The scaffolding was rickety. The last guy who tried to jump over the Great Wall of China died for the effort. And his ankle was completely shattered because he took one warm-up run, and the humidity was off. It was higher in China, and it slowed him down. And then he proceeded to break 2 world records, land it, and when he was done, instead of just kind of walking away, he did it 4 more times. So on the fully shattered ankle, just because he doesn't skate for the podium, for the triumph of the victory, for everything else. Mega ramps cost $500,000 to build. Getting to skate on a new one doesn't come along every day, and he loved what he was doing so much that he was willing to risk his life 5 times in a row on a shattered leg just for that experience. So I don't know why I wanted, I don't know what the moral of the story here is, but it does give you kind of a look at what's possible with passion.
Wow, I watched the documentary actually on Danny Way jumping the Great Wall of China. I'm very familiar with that. And I mean, even a 12-foot ramp, like a 12-foot ramp is something that there's a very small percentage of the world that would dare drop in on a skateboard. So let alone a mega ramp.
He pulled 4 Gs on a shattered leg. It's 5 times in a row. That's like somebody dropping an 800-pound motorcycle on your back at the bottom of that ramp on a shattered leg.
And just so the listeners can get an idea of how many Gs this is relative to, 4 Gs, how many Gs, Stephen, do you hit when you go into space?
So takeoff, the standard across takeoff is 3 Gs. Sometimes it can get as high as 8. As a general rule, people start to black out around 5.
And so Danny Way is hitting 4 Gs on a broken ankle.
Yeah.
And guys, the documentary that I was talking about that really depicts this, and it's like one of the best documentaries I've seen, not just on skateboarding, but just about like taking fear and risking it. It's called The Way of Lightning, and it's about Danny Way's jump over the Great Wall of China. It's an amazing documentary, very moving.
Yeah, my friend Jacob Rosenberg directed it, made that great film. Jacob just did a great job with that.
All right, Stephen, and that's going to conclude the knowledge round a while back we did. And now let's go back to you, shift the focus to you. What's exciting you today, and what are you currently working on these days?
This is going to sound so cuckoo, but because of Rise of Superman, because of all this work, because I'm working with so many businesses and organizations, I have come to believe over the past 6 months that the coolest revolution in Silicon Valley isn't taking place in technology. It's taking place in people management. And companies like Google and Facebook, they're starting to do really radical things that really drive flow. And, we're looking at companies that are already kind of at the cutting edge of exponentially growing technology, and they're starting to create really high flow environments that are going to magnify this out. So one of the things that really gets me excited right now is how these ideas are starting to be applied in business and the radical, innovative future it might make possible.
Yeah, and that kind of goes with your book, Abundance. It's like the future looks so much better, and maybe just a whole nother podcast there. So, Stephen, go ahead and share with the audience how the listeners can connect with you.
Yeah, first, check me out. riseofsuperman.com is the easiest way. If you want to know more about the Flow Genome Project, the organization I have that studies flow, that's flowgenomeproject.co, or Stephen Kotler, StevenKotler.com.
All right, Stephen, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story, lessons, your book, and a lot of your insights. And I think we got to learn more about you and the knowledge on there. I like that.
Hey, my pleasure.
All right, and that's going to wrap up episode 52 with Stephen Kotler and the Rise of Superman. All right, and the challenge that I have for you guys listening today is ask yourself this question. When do you experience flow in your life? Is it when you're running, riding a bike, in the gym? Is it when you're listening or playing music? Is it when you're speaking, public speaking? Is it something you don't do anymore? Because I want you to bring that back into your life. Bring that activity that you experience flow in and do it today. Feel the flow and lose yourself in the moment. Feel what that feels like again. And share that experience with me. You can email me at andrew@knowledgeformen.com. That's knowledge, F-O-R, men.com. And I just can't, it's just something you don't want to lose. You don't want to forget that feeling, that experience of flow. Because to me, flow is when you kind of come alive. And I think more people need to come alive. And so if you can get that by experiencing flow, then you need to be doing that activity on a daily basis because it's going to make you come alive. All right? Until next time, guys. Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast show. It's been a pleasure having you be a part of a thriving community of men who want to crush it in all aspects of life. I'm on a mission here to inspire millions of guys, and with your help, we're going to make a dent in the universe. Check out knowledgeformen.com for a ton of free content that's designed to help you live a remarkable life. Again, that's knowledgeformen.com. I hope to see you there. And always remember, 2014 is the official year of the crush, where we take action to get the life we've always dreamed of. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, and until next time, let's do it.